Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast. I am your host, Mark Thackeray. So excited to be here with you today. Pumped that you are joining me. And we're going to be talking about lifetime value of a patient and how to calculate that and what that tells you, what you can do with that knowledge. So it's going to be a shorter episode today, but it's something that I think is very, very important and can inform your marketing decisions moving forward. And I remember when I was first introduced to this concept, I didn't really know what it was. I was fresh out of college. I was running a photography business, and I was just, balls to the wall, like trying to get everything done. You do everything that you can to bring in new clients and to grow the business. And I remember I heard this concept. And it's funny because when I talk to practice owners today, when I'm onboarding or just having discussions with prospectives, this comes up inevitably, and I get a lot of blank stares. And so I get that. That's kind of what I'm telling you this story, because I didn't understand this or the importance of this when I first was getting into business. But I first heard about it from a man named Joe Polish, and Joe's a world-class marketer. He's an entrepreneur. He's the consummate networker. And he's phenomenal. He's been a mentor for me for years and years and years. And I remember at the time, like I mentioned, I was running my photography business, trying to scale it up from serving local clients to go national. And what struck me was something that Joe said about this. He said, "You'll never know how much you can afford to invest in marketing until you know how much a client is worth to you." And that was a revelation to me. You'll never know how much you can afford to invest in marketing until you know how much a client is worth to you. In other words, once you determine that average value of a client or a patient, then you can figure out how much you can afford to spend in attracting new patients in the acquisition phase. And I remember going back that night, I was writing it all down. I was so pumped, going through it with my photography business. And I'll walk through the formula with you here in a second, but it was life-changing. I got to see, because before that, and this is what I hear a lot from practice owners and from dentists, from prospects as I'm talking to them, is they don't really have a great idea of what that number is. There's a lot of, it depends. There's some kind of back and forth. There's kind of a generic bracket that it falls under, but they don't really have a specific number that they can look at and point to. And that's unfortunate, because then you're going off your feelings. And we see this all the time. If you feel busy, if you have a lot of work to do, you feel like things are going well. That's just the assumption, that's the perception that we have. Oh, if you're busy, you must be doing good. Things are busy. You hear that all the time when people are talking about they're busy. Oh, things are busy. And you automatically equate that. The connotation is that things are going well. But the reality doesn't necessarily mean that. It could just mean that you have a lot of tasks that aren't really, revenue generating tasks, but you are still busy. There's a lot of things. Our emotions can betray us very, very easily. We know this all the time from watching movies that we know aren't real, but still feel that prickle. We still feel, our hair stand up on end, or we overeat, thinking that that's going to solve our problems, which it does not. So we have to look at the numbers, and this is one of the reasons why you hear so often to know your numbers. That is a mantra that gets repeated time and time again from entrepreneurs, from marketers, from overwhelming and overbearing accountants. They just drill that into you. But there is good reason for that. Once you know your numbers, specifically the lifetime value of a patient, now you have ammo. Now you have this. You actually have the upper hand when it comes to patient acquisition, because you can see, okay, this is what it costs me this is what a patient will bring me over the long run, not just now, because a lot of people focus on the immediate, the first appointment. But now let's look at it from a high level view and see what they're doing long term. This is a long game. This is where you look at what they're going to bring me over time, as opposed to just this one visit. And so it's important to ask yourself this question: how much is a patient worth to you? And to be able to answer that clearly, because like I mentioned, this is gonna inform your decisions on new patient acquisition. It's going to help you better understand retention and how to improve that retention and thus increase lifetime patient value. It's going to help with referrals. All these things gives you such a better position for growth. It provides you with, it also, this is one thing that I recognize too over the last several years, is it provides you with more predictability in your practice because you have improved accuracy in forecasting. You better understand that, okay, these are the trends. This is what I've seen. Over time, they're going to spend roughly this amount with me. And that's going to, that improves your ability to predict what's going to happen in the future. You have fewer highs and lows. You're not riding that roller coaster as much. And it makes it so much easier. It makes it so much easier. So let's talk about, how do you do that? How do you calculate lifetime value of a patient? And it's pretty simple. It's not a complex formula by any means. Here's the way I do it. There's different ways you can do it, but I don't think you need to get too complex with this. So the first step is to determine the average annual production per patient. How much does the average patient pay you each year? So figure that out. You can take all your patients, divide it you take all the production for the year, divide it by the number of patients, kind of see that year over year. What's that looking like? Get a number, and then you're going to multiply that by the number of years that an average patient remains active in your practice. So the utilization, how often are they coming in? What does that look like? Or for how many years do they remain a patient? So is it 2 years? Is it just once? 1 year, like when I was talking about I had my photography business, it was a once in a lifetime deal. It was a wedding. It was a commercial event. It was, you didn't do those more than once, it was, so I didn't have to worry about that, but I did have back end sales that came as a result of those things. So that's similar in that regard to your practice, where in this case, you're going to have follow-up treatment. You're going to have cases that were presented, weren't accepted, eventually get accepted down the road. So those are things that you want to factor into this value. And that's going to give you, so once you determine the average annual production per patient, you're going to multiply that by the number of years that they remain a patient on average. And then you're going to subtract the costs associated with that patient. So acquisition costs, how much you've spent to acquire that patient on average. Again, knowing your numbers with respect to, hey, I invested this much, I generated this much. This is how much I invest in marketing overall. These are how many new patients I've gotten. You can determine your average acquisition cost and factor that into this overall formula. And I'll put a link up here to download a worksheet that you can download and fill out for your practice. It's very visual. You'll see it's not too complex. Like I said, there's just a couple of steps to it. So let's take an example from a practice in Arizona. So average production per patient per year is $876. $876. You're looking at all those, the bigger cases, smaller cases, all that stuff's factored into this number, $876 per year. And the average number of years a patient remains active in this practice, 3.5 years, 42 months. Okay. So 3.5 years. And then the average of the associated costs with this patient, on average, $525. Okay. So then you plug those numbers into the equation. 876 times 3.5 equals $3,066. Subtract the total amount of costs associated, 525, to get an average lifetime value of $2,541. Okay. And that's pretty much what you need to do. It's, like I said, it's not that complex, but it is very, very powerful. Now with this data, you can see and more easily understand if any of the marketing campaigns you're running are actually worth the investment, right? You can see, okay, am I willing to invest $50, $150, $350, $500, whatever, to acquire a new patient that's ultimately going to bring in $2,541. It's probably an easier way to say it. Would I invest $350, $500 to get back 2,500, 2,541? Is that a trade you're comfortable making? And for most people in the world, they would say all day, every day, right? If you could do that and leverage that and just trade like that, there's no telling what you could do with your practice. But when you don't know that lifetime value, you are just left guessing. You're just trying to go off gut feel. It's anecdotal. You don't have this empirical data to fall back on and say, nope, this is exactly what happened. This gives you that clarity. This gives you that confidence to move forward and say, yes, I can be more aggressive in my patient acquisition because I understand that this is what I'm going to get on the back end. They're going to be coming back for the next couple of years. My case acceptance, I look at it from a long-term play anyway. I just keep them coming back into my practice. If they don't want to do it today, if they don't want to do it next month, if they don't want to do it 6 months, just keep them coming back. The chances of converting them to getting them to accept that treatment eventually, just they're in your favor as long as you get them to keep coming back. It's the long game, right? So, and you can also, what's cool about this, you can also factor in referrals. If you get a consistent number of referrals, let's say you get 15 new patient referrals each month. Okay, so that comes to 180 patient referrals over the course of the year, and then you say you have a practice around 1,800 patients. For sake of math, we'll do 1,800 patients. You get 180 patient referrals over the course of the year, right? So you divide 180 by 1,800 to get 10%. So what does that tell you? It tells you that one out of every 10 patients will give you a new patient, okay, over the course of the year. Super cool. Now you can actually factor that into your patient value because that 1 out of 10 of every new patients you get is going to give you a referral, right? So you can add that value back into that equation to increase your overall patient value. Super cool. Super cool. But this is exactly actually the strategy that a lot of very aggressive growth-minded companies operate with. It's like I mentioned before, it's a very long game. It's the long game approach to growing a business, and here's a classic example that I absolutely love. This is Icy Hot. We're all familiar probably with the Icy Hot product. And this is what they did. They were doing, I think they're going along. They had this couple million in sales annually, and it just wasn't taking off like they'd hoped. And they eventually, the ownership changed hands, and those that were going through, and the reason why it changed hands is the people that were buying it, they discovered something very, very powerful. They were doing their due diligence, looking into all the order history, customer data, things like that. And they recognized that those that used Icy Hot remained faithful consumers of Icy Hot multiple times over the course of their lifetime, essentially. And they realized that, man, there is so much opportunity, because once you get a customer, they retain this customer forever. It's like saying, once I got a patient, if they stayed with me 10 years, 15 years, that's like kind of what they saw in Icy Hot. And so they did the deal. And then what they did was they reached out to hundreds of radio stations, TV stations all across the country, and put together an agreement so that whenever these media stations had unused advertising time, they would pitch Icy Hot. They'd run their advertising, right? And in exchange, Icy Hot would give them all of the revenue from that first sale, all of it. And actually, I've read some details that it was actually more than that. It was actually more than 100% of the revenue was given back to those media stations. Icy Hot's like, cool, you take that. I'm totally good with that. Why? Because they knew that the bulk of the value from these customers came from those many repurchases after that initial sale. They realized they could totally afford to give away that revenue from that sale, because they would easily make it up on the back end. And today this is all known as kind of a loss leader approach, right? Where you are willing to give away to acquire, right? To acquire a new customer, a new client, a new patient. And they use this strategy to acquire thousands and thousands of new loyal customers, eventually selling the company for $60 million to Searle and Company, I think is what it was called. So isn't that cool? I mean, it's just this, it's a shift in mindset to see, instead of saying, oh man, I have to pay $50 for a new patient, or, oh man, I have to pay $150 or $350 for a new patient. It's saying, look at this, dude. I can afford to invest 400, 500, 600, whatever, again, you have to be comfortable with this, but I can afford to invest all this to acquire a new patient. And chances are, your competition is not doing this. They're doing the same thing that a lot of people are doing, which is, oh man, I wish I didn't have to pay $50 or $75 or $100 for a new patient. They're shying away from that because they don't really know their numbers and they don't understand this long game approach. But can you see just how quickly that can, how that could grow your practice? If you were able to do that, and it just accelerates your overall practice growth. I mean, it's like saying, okay, well, I want to be here in 5 years, and taking the standard historical approach, you'd be, you kind of linear growth year over year. But this way, you can speed that process up and take the shortcut and be, I could be 5 years down the road in just 12 months time, 15 months time, 2 years time, right? I mean, you can speed that up and really increase your patient base by 10, 15, 25%, depending on how aggressive you are. And that all comes down to, again, knowing your numbers and calculating the lifetime value of a patient. So that's it for today, you guys. Hopefully that's helpful. I do have a worksheet. I'll link it up. It's actually by SPP Dental Partners, one of the sponsors of the show. They put this together so that you can download it. You don't have to, it's not an opt-in or anything like that. Just go to their site, click on it, download it, you're good to go. So hopefully this was helpful, you guys. Again, as always, if you've enjoyed the podcast or anything that I've had to say or made you laugh or cry or made you feel better about yourself, then I'd love a review. Please leave a review wherever you are listening to the show. That would be a tremendous help, and really appreciate that. Until next time, my friends, be good.